I used to do a subliminal magic trick with the 4 queens in this little leather wallet. And this diabolical routine will help us understand subconscious mind exercises that allow you to become the architect of your dreams, provided that you follow a few simple rules. There are many ways to perform this particular trick, but I used to love framing it as a demonstration of subconscious and unconscious subliminal influence. So we play a game of elimination, and I would say, we'll go with whatever you say first, red or black. And then the people would say, typically, black. So I'd say, fine, black cards are gone. Then I would say, that leaves us with the hearts or the diamonds. What will we eliminate next? And typically people would say diamonds. So I'd say, diamonds, gone. And I'd say, did I influence you? And they'd say, don't know, magic boy. Show us. So I would say fine, and I would open up this little leather wallet that's been sitting there the entire time, take out the 4 cards, and I would say, look, I have 1 card and it's face up. It happens to be the Queen of Hearts. And they would be, huh? How is that possible? And I'd say, you know, I was so convinced that I would be able to influence this outcome that not only did I place the Queen of Hearts face up in advance, but I also put it on a different colored back. A different card from a different deck. And that would really blow their minds. And I said, but what's really going to bake your noodle later when it comes to my subconscious, subliminal influence over your mind is that I had the guts to not bring any other queens at all. Now, what does this have to do with subconscious mind exercises? It has a lot, and in order to help you understand the principles and why I use this trick in the first place, let me explain that this trick has actually multiple tricks inside of it. So if we were together and I performed that trick for you, I would say to you, as you were thinking, how was that possible, and asking me to explain, I would say, I actually subliminally influenced you to make that choice. So the trick is basically a trick, but the real trick is when I explain to you and I say, listen, when I said it was a game of elimination and I said, you know, go ahead and choose red or black, my actual motion of going like this is causing your mind to choose to eliminate black. And when I talk about choosing the heart over the diamond, this slight twitching of my hand backwards is influencing you to get rid of the diamond so that we arrive at the heart. And I tell that to people and they believe it. But the reality is that that has nothing to do with it. So the first trick is how I actually get you to arrive at that. And the second trick is getting people to believe that there was some kind of subconscious influence to arriving at that. And Derren Brown is very, very good at this. If you've ever seen his routine where he ends up with the word influential, for example. I think it's influential if memory serves.
Tear around, influential. Tear around, influential. 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 Influential.
And that's why it was the word influential. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming out tonight. And thank you for playing the night.
And it is so incredible because the actual trick is convincing you that there was some kind of subconscious influence that caused an entire audience to arrive at that. However, when we look at the amazing Kreskin's definition of hypnosis, he says that hypnosis is simply the acceptance of a suggestion. And if you can get yourself to accept a suggestion and that the suggestions you make are correctly constructed, you really can become the architect of your own dreams, provided that there is some logic to what you're doing premised on the rules that govern reality. So I'm a very scientific-minded person, and I don't believe in woo-woo, and I actually don't believe in things that require belief. I want things to be true so that we don't have to believe in them. And the exercises that I'm providing today, they do follow that principle, that the only worthwhile definition of hypnosis is the acceptance of a suggestion. And if you give yourself correct suggestions and you accept them thoroughly, you literally can help yourself accomplish extraordinary things. But you need to actually follow the rules that govern reality. So what I mean by that is that if you don't base your goals on your existing competence, your ability to actually accomplish certain things based on your skills now, you're probably going to fall flat on your face. So all of the acceptance of suggestions in the world won't mean a thing. But if you're willing to set goals premised on your existing ability, your competence to accomplish certain things, and then you set a framework that allows you to move in a logical and linear manner, then you're much more likely to be able to succeed, and then you really can influence yourself to accept suggestions that will help you move towards those goals so fast it'll make your head spin. but in a good way, of course. So let's get into a bunch of subconscious mind exercises that I've used on myself in order to be able to do the things that I do on this channel. And by the way, if you're new here, get subscribed, hit that thumbs up, and leave a comment and let me know your experiences with subconscious mind exercises in the past. I'm not talking about law of attraction. I'm not talking about woo-woo stuff. I'm talking about things that actually make sense. And I've played around with a lot of things that didn't make sense, which is part of how I earned the techniques I'm going to share today. So with that in mind, let's get started. Now, this first exercise might seem a little bit weird, but it's going to be important for some people out there, so don't throw it away. The reality is that a lot of people don't accept that they can be influenced. They reject the idea that influence is possible. Not me, I'm bulletproof. But the reality is that that's very unlikely to be true. If you have a driver's license, you've been influenced to accept that the law will put you in prison or fine you if you don't. And some people aren't convinced by that. And there's all kinds of funny videos on the YouTube where people are saying, I'm a sovereign citizen and all this kind of weird stuff. But what happens? They wind up being in prison because they've been influenced by somebody else who sold them a product about, sovereign citizen nonsense, right? And who knows? I'm not necessarily making final judgment on whether that is correct or incorrect. The point is that people are influenced one way or the other. And so if you want to benefit from various teachings out there, there are many, many students who just completely reject the suggestions of teachers who have accomplished what they want to accomplish, and they're not allowing themselves to be influenced by that. So when you see somebody who has achieved what you want to achieve, and they're saying, do it this way, follow these steps, as long as it's not involving illicit substances or illegal activities, you might want to consider understanding deeply what those steps are and seeing if you can allow yourself to be influenced by them so that you can follow those steps. So a simple exercise is to just try to reverse engineer what somebody else has accomplished that you yourself want to accomplish. Now there's a bit of a trap here because you want to make sure that you are desiring the outcome authentically for yourself and not desiring their desire. So sometimes we just want to have their energy. We want to have their go-get-itness and their grit rather than the thing itself. So we want to be careful when we model other people that we're actually trying to model the path to the outcome that we legitimately want, and that we're not trying to somehow, through some sort of psychic vampire energy structure, get their essence, because that ain't going to happen. This brings us to the second subconscious mind exercise, which I call the perfect present exercise. And we want to write down in 3 to 5 sentences, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, a vision statement of what we want our perfect day to look like, as if we had it right now. And we want to do it for as many days in a row as we possibly can. And it is very, very important to do this because if you have any sort of distortion or lies in your vision, it will be very difficult to write it again and again and again. And you will expose to yourself, or at least give yourself a chance at seeing how you may be subconsciously lying to yourself. And a quick example, I used to have a girlfriend, she wanted a house on the beach in Vancouver, and I sat there and I figured out what kind of job I would need and what kind of income I would need to buy the house that she wanted, and I thought it would fulfill me deeply. But I was trying to desire her desire rather than my desire. And by writing it out over and over and over again, it dawned on me after about 10 or 11 days, wait a second, this is not my dream, this is hers. So then I shifted and I started to write my own desired outcome. And I wrote it out for 90 days, and within those 90 days I had revealed to myself more or less the exact path to realizing that dream, and then I had it realized. Now, speaking of subconscious influence, I wrote it in The Victorious Mind, the full description and more about this exercise and the whole story if you want to grab that book. And people do get that book ever since I started showing it on my shelf at a much higher clip. So subconscious influence does work, but I was my own obstacle, and the perfect present exercise helped me see how that was the case. And then when I just shifted things, made the description a lot better and a lot cleaner and a lot more focused on what I really wanted, then how to get there and what to do and how to do it was so much more clear, and then bang presto, away we go. The next exercise, closely related to the perfect present exercise, is the treasure map. And this idea I encountered in a course. I was very depressed at the time. I totally discounted it. But later, when I was doing the perfect present exercise, I revisited it and I gave it a try. And I think it has huge implications for anyone. And the basic idea is you just get a bunch of images that represent what it is that you're hoping to accomplish, and you put them on a piece of paper, and then you put them somewhere in your environment where you see it every day. Now, I'm the kind of person, in for a penny, in for a pound. So I not only put it in one room, I put it in the bedroom, I put it in the bathroom, I put it in the kitchen. I saw it all over the place multiple times throughout the day. And at that time, my first treasure map, I had wanted to be in a band again, so I got a picture from when I was in a band before and stuck it on there, and I wanted to travel around, so I put an airplane on there, and I wanted to write multiple books and be able to do that, so I put a picture of some books and a desk where I was going to write, and then, you know, I wanted to be able to like double down on my Bach studies at the time, so I had a picture of Bach with a bass guitar, and it was very, very influential.
Influential.
Because I saw it again and again and again. And it was hard for me to forget that these were my goals because I would see them all the time. Now, in terms of it influencing the subconscious, this is where we can, you know, put on our thinking cap and think, is it really subconscious? Well, no, not really, because I kept thinking about it again and again and again. So it is an element in the environment that you may not notice all the time, and it may just trigger your conscious thinking much, much more often. Because Derren Brown, he points out in Tricks of the Mind that there probably is no such thing as subliminal influence, but there may be the fact that certain elements can cause you to think consciously. But if you aren't perceiving things consciously, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to do anything with them. So the extent to which this is actually subconscious it is irrelevant at the end of the day. The point is that it's there and it can influence you because you put it there. And the more that it's premised on the truth of what you actually want and not what you think that you want because you want to fulfill somebody else's goals, well, then the more likely the influence is going to actually help you. Now, notice another detail here. I had been writing for years. So the idea of writing books that I could make my living on is just totally premised on a skill I actually had. It wasn't, you know, starting a multi-billion-dollar company and somehow sitting back as the CEO. I didn't make that image there at all, and I didn't have it in my perfect present exercise either. It was premised on my existing competence. And it's very, very important that you get that, you understand that. I don't know how to subliminally influence you to understand just how important that is. But if you don't set your goals and your outcomes based on something that you actually can do, then you're not really likely to make it. You've got to base it on where you are in the world. And that can be a hard wake-up call for some people, but it is the most beautiful and bountiful thing that you can do if you're willing to look it in the eye and say, okay, that is where I want to get, but I'm not going to be able to get there without this skill first. So you identify what that skill is, and then you work towards that, and you make visual images that help influence you and keep your eye on the game so that you're actually playing a game that you can win. The next exercise that I have for you is to learn self-hypnosis and apply it, or if you prefer, guided, self-constructed meditation recordings. And I needed this so badly at a particular period in my life because I had been in Toronto at one point visiting my Dr. Fotter, or my dissertation supervisor, while I was living in Manhattan, went to Toronto, and he told me as we were walking down a winter street in Toronto, Bay Street, I think it was, he said, you know, the market has changed. Even if you published 12 academic books, you'd have a hard time finding a career as a professor. And at that time, I had a big attitude, and I said, well, if that's the case, I'll build my own university. Which, using some of these exercises, is exactly what I ended up doing with magneticmemorymethod.com. But in reality, back then, I went back to Manhattan and I felt like it was the end of the world because I was like, why did I do all of this if there's never going to be a job for me as a professor? And it became very difficult for me to motivate myself to write my dissertation, which is several hundred pages, 100,000 words approximately. And then you have to go and defend it in front of a hostile committee that's going to ask you all kinds of hard questions after you're so exhausted from this giant epic feat of writing such a document. And, you know, I hung my head and tried to figure out how am I going to make myself do this. Now, there were a couple of things that I did, such as thinking of my dad who only went to grade 3, and how I was symbolically going to the PhD to try to like be the opposite of that, and really make good on what he had given to make it possible for me to go to school, etc. So why would I quit after having come so far to sort of honor what he never had? And this was all going through my mind, and I thought about how people climb Mount Everest, and there's nothing more to see up there than other mountains that you might climb. So things don't necessarily have to have a big meaning, etc. It doesn't have to lead to a job or whatever. And that was helping. That helped a lot. But what ultimately really, really helped is that during some of my dissertation research on friendship, I had taken certification as a hypnotherapist. And the reason why I did it is to understand the role of influence in friendship. And it was just practical, applied research, and it was very, very helpful. And it enabled me to know how to create effective self-hypnosis recordings. And so that's what I did. I recorded for myself a self-hypnosis program that would encourage me and give me an ego boost, a lift of my energy to get it done. And I listened to it every single day, day after day after day, and then I sat down and I did what it took to get the dissertation done. And it was so tremendously helpful. Now, you need to put some time and effort and study into what self-hypnosis is, what makes a good self-hypnosis recording versus a poor one, and you need it to be multisensory, and there's a number of things that you can learn about that. And I have some instructions on how to create a guided meditation recording for yourself on my blog. I'll have the link for that in the description below. And you got to experiment with it. You might not get it right the first time. I certainly didn't get it right the first time. I recorded several versions, but it was so helpful. And I really want you to pay attention to what I'm saying here about the ego boost. So much of self-hypnosis or hypnosis when you go to a hypnotherapist isn't really about what it seems to be about. It's often about giving your ego a lift and making it that you believe, that you accept the suggestion, that you are the little train that could, so that you do the little things that the little train did, and it's exactly that. So call a spade a spade. You're trying to build up self-belief and confidence, and you can do it. You can influence yourself to do it. And, there's what you might call subconscious elements in it when you start to dip into some of the techniques that hypnotherapists use, and I think is very rich and rewarding for anyone to learn. But don't dabble in it. Make it something that you really deeply understand and practice on yourself. And I think you'll find that that exercise in and of itself, which has 2 parts, study self-hypnosis or guided meditation and practice it towards a truthful outcome, the thing that you actually really want. And I think you'll be so wonderfully benefited throughout your life, time and time again. One of my favorite subconscious mind exercises is, it's got a couple moving parts here, but it has to do with your dreams. Now, dreams are so fascinating, and they have a memory benefit because if you were to practice dream recall, you wake up with a memory exercise each and every morning as you go, what did I dream and what was going on here? And you write it down. You create procedural memory that helps you remember more and more dreams as time goes on. And then you have this wonderful palette of material that is normally lost to you to work with. Now the question is, how scientifically do you work with it? So when I talk about recording dreams and interpreting them, I don't mean the woo-woo sort of la-di-da, new agey stuff that's out there. Look, if you benefit from that, that's great. Go ahead and, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But I'm talking more about a scientific analysis of taking that material and then thinking about it in a self-inquiry way. So that's curious. Why did that person come up at this time? Not interpreting it as such, but rather just asking the question and seeing what comes up without needing it to mean anything. Not what it means, but what it could mean if you just do a cross comparison of this dream versus that dream. Also, you'll see recurring patterns, and those recurring patterns can be quite interesting, not because they have any particular meaning, but it just gives you more meat for example, lucid dreaming, because you start to then see that the pattern is happening again, and it wakes you up in the dream, and you realize, I'm dreaming again, which is a very, very fascinating experience that if you haven't had is wonderful. And, it's not necessarily that it gives you any more insights into your subconscious, but it's just a great thing to have. And you could try certain things like using that time when you're lucid in your dreams to practice your memory palaces, which is very fun and fascinating and interesting to do. But it's also very hard because the instant that you get control in your dreams, there's so many competing factors that start to take control away from you, and then you wake up. Now there's another angle to this, and that is something I learned from Dr. Robert Langs. Now I've read many of his books, but I have a secret advantage, which is that I was also his patient for many times in psychotherapy. And he also was my psychiatrist who helped monitor some medications that I was taking at that time. Anyway, his theory of the unconscious is that it's a kind of filter. And the filter is designed to prevent you from feeling various anxieties. And 3 of the main anxieties that he talked about were predator anxiety, prey anxiety, and existential anxiety. And if you're able to somehow perceive how your mind is filtering those things out all the time, then you're able to not absorb so much stuff into your unconscious. Now, some of these things are contentious, and some people, have thought that it's not true and it doesn't bear out in the science. I'm not so sure. I think that this is, if you look at the society at large, and I did a lot of film studies as a student and as a professor, I taught film studies for a long time. And if you look at what movies do and how that they express the unconscious imagination of humans, I think there's a lot to what he's saying. He's not the only person who talks about this kind of stuff. And if you really apply yourself to it, paying attention to your dreams and starting to record your dreams over time is a great way, an introductory way, and he has many books that you can find on Amazon that will take you into it. Another wonderful exercise is called mind mapping. This is the mind map for the video you're watching right now. Now, mind mapping is really powerful. People ask me all the time, Anthony, how do you write so many blog posts? How do you write so many books? How do you make so many videos? How do you make so many podcasts? How? And mind mapping has a huge amount to do with it. The thing is, though, is that there's a couple of reasons why that mind mapping helps. First, there's just the production of ideas. So Tony Buzan had this concept of radiant thinking and using the mind map to represent brain cells on paper and to unlock their power, to have what he called supernova explosions of ideas. And that's what it really helps you do because of how you focus on individual ideas. And changing colors and having these different tendrils go out and flow in particular ways is a way of getting in touch with flow, of being in the task positive network of the brain instead of the default mode network, which is I, me. This is more like connecting with the topic itself. And you're changing colors and using all these different keywords and, oh, it's just so wonderful. And you're not thinking too much, but rather you're being the ideas that you want. You're producing and reproducing the brain cell on the page. But the other way that mind mapping helps me is that I keep my mind maps on my desk for my various projects. And this is like the treasure map. It is constantly in my view whenever I'm in my working space. Now, I don't photocopy them and put them in multiple rooms. I just have them on my desk, and I have them there until I get the project done. And it might be a full course that I'm doing, it might be a book that I'm writing, or it might be just this video. And it helps me get more and more ideas because I see it in my space. But it also helps me remember to actually get it done, to show up and shoot the video. So it's like turning your entire environment into a memory palace by not only unlocking ideas by using rich multisensory associations in multiple colors and vibrant ways that excite you and stimulate you, but actually encountering it again and again and again so you don't forget that you wanted to do something, and then you take the steps necessary to get it done, because it's all too easy to forget that you set up a goal and you wanted to do it, but if you don't have the reminders around, well, then you forget to do it. And then you go, oh yeah, I needed to do that thing, which then leads you to feel guilt. And then you end up unconsciously communicating to other people in nasty ways that you could have avoided by just getting the stuff done in the first place and not allowing yourself to have the anxiety. So mind mapping, it unlocks ideas, but it also gives you this very visual piece of information that you can put in your environment to make sure that you don't forget what it was you wanted to do and the material needed in order to get it done. The next exercise I have for you is entrainment. I love entrainment, and this is where it gets into a little bit of woo-woo, but I still find it very useful. So what do I mean by the woo-woo element? Well, some people say that there are bodies in reality that have higher levels of energy than other bodies. So if you were to bring yourself in alignment with the higher energy level, then it will somehow rub off on you and increase your energy. And so people talk about, entraining yourself by being around crystals and all that sort of stuff. The way that I interpreted this is, I love music. Music has not only a lot of energy, but it has forward force. And so I entrained myself, and I just use that word because it is a higher form of energy when I'm feeling low energy, to put on music and then I write. So most of my blog posts, most of my book chapters, most of anything that I've written for years have been written while listening to one album over and over and over again. It's like I've trained my brain to turn the music on and go. And it's so wonderful and amazing. Now, sometimes I change that album, but I usually pick an album and stick with it. So for example, with my new novel, I have written that entirely by listening to the same album over and over and over and over and over again. And then I edited it while listening to that album. And it just makes it possible to just be in the zone. And I'm not the only writer who does this. Stephen King talks about listening to music. I don't know if he does it in the same way that I am talking about with the same album over and over and over again, but it's not unusual for writers to do this. Now, does it give you some special mystical energy? I don't think so, but it does make sense to me that it has a particular energy, and I want that energy. Now, speaking of this novel, it is connected to a game that we're going to play as well. And so if you would like to be one of the first people invited to the novel when it is released, and to be able to play that game where you'll have my energy that maybe will rub off on you for memory techniques and memory training and general mind boosting, I don't know, influence, go to magneticmemorymethod.com/NS. NS means novel sample, and you'll not only get the first chapter of this novel, you'll get the cover and the title reveal, and then you'll be invited to get the book when it comes out and play this game with us. Another exercise I want to share, this is really powerful. If you are ever grumpy and groany and grumbling and you feel like the world's against you and you don't have what you need and boo-hoo, all that sort of stuff, I've been there. I have been so convinced that the world owed me, whatever I wanted, and I didn't have to do anything for it because I got a PhD, yada yada. Yeah, it's just nastiness that needs to go. And one way to influence yourself so that it is gone is gratitude journaling. Now, there's a lot of science around this. I first encountered it in Richard Weissman's 59 Seconds, and the idea is you just write out 10 things that you're grateful for. And you might think, well, I'm not grateful for anything. And I certainly started that way myself. But then I realized, wait a second, I've got water, I got a roof over my head, I got food every day, I have, maybe things weren't perfect the way I grew up, but at least I got to go to school, unlike my dad who didn't get past grade 3, and all these things. And it's just, there's so much to just write that out. And then you go, things aren't so bad. Oh, and then you do it again and again and again and again and again. And I still do this to this day. I don't do it as much as I used to, but for years I did it religiously, day after day after day. So I would never forget that I had it good, and I had it really good. And then the thing is it kind of helps you notice more and more and more and more. And I think you can get to the point where your brain just brings it back to you on autopilot. And still to this day, I'll revisit it. If I ever find myself wilting or slumping, well, then I know exactly what to do and how to do it. And it's just astonishing to me that, just a simple reminder of having water and food and a roof over your head. Wow, that is amazing. And then you can be grateful for many, many more things. And, oh man, it's just so wonderful. So you influence yourself that way. And then you look back through your journals and you see how many days that you've done it. And I go through all my journals and it's just like there for years and years and years. It just reminds you, and it gives you gratitude for yourself, for being that person who followed what the teacher said. Richard Weissman says to do it, I did it. And I have a reminder of being a real student. I was skeptical of it, but I was a real skeptic, a skeptic who actually puts it to the test. Instead of whining and grumbling and complaining, here's another schmuck who's saying do this, do that, and science validates it, yada, yada. I became the scientist, and that's what I encourage you to do. Become the scientist. Because when you do the experiments in the laboratory of your own mind, then you are the one who gets to benefit from them. And because you've decided to be scientific about it, well, if things don't work out, you can then be even more scientific and say, well, why didn't it work out? Maybe I was just not in the right headspace at the time. Maybe I didn't follow some of the instructions. Maybe I need to go back to it and ask the author some questions that I had in my mind but didn't ask at the time. And maybe the answer will help tip the scales and help me do it better the next time. As long as you are very, very fair and open and truly scientific about it, which just means to gather evidence that either confirms or denies the hypothesis, well, then you're going to proceed through life so much better and have so many more interesting experiments rather than just discounting things and writing them off. And of course, when you do discount things and write them off, then you'll also have the tools of being able to say, maybe I'll reassess that in the future based on further evidence, which is exactly what science is, a constantly changing thing that is always subject to change based on future further evidence. But if you're closed off to it, you're missing out on so much in life. That brings us to self-inquiry and tools of negation. So one of the exercises that you can do is to start asking yourself questions like, who am I? Where am I? Where is the I that appears in my head? And there's many, many resources that you can go into, and I've talked about a lot of them in The Victorious Mind. There's Douglas Harding on having no head. There's Gary Weber's Happiness Beyond Thought and Evolving Beyond Thought. Many, many resources where you learn to just ask these questions. And it makes sense, like this is the weirdest thing in the world. Who am I? Where exactly am I? Where is this sense of I in me? But if you really practice it, if you really pay it its due, what it helps you do is start to feel the production of yourself as a production, and then you're able to let it go. And then you begin to see that these subconscious processes of the I, me, coming from the default mode network, they actually can be broken. So you can spend more time in the task positive network. And there, you're not so yanked away by this thought or that thought that just comes out of nowhere. We don't know why thoughts come out of the unconscious or the subconscious out of nowhere, but we know that we can break them. And there's many, many tools. So one of the things that you can do is not so much a question, but it is a statement, which is in Sanskrit, Neti Neti, which is, not this, not this. And some people teach Neti Neti Neti. Now, you can do it in English too, which is just not this, or cancel, cancel. Had to look in a Mary Palace there for a second. But cancel, cancel. And that's just another nice way of doing it. So you have a thought that you don't want, and then you just go cancel, cancel. And you turn this into a practice over time. You'll be able to actually just start doing it, because procedural memory training will help you do it in advance of even thinking about it. And what I mean by procedural memory training is like riding a bike. How do you know how to ride a bike after a long winter and you haven't ridden for months? You get on it, maybe you're a bit wobbly, but you still know what to do and how to do it. Well, it's because you've done it so many times. It's a procedure, like using a fork and knife, or after you've learned chopsticks, using chopsticks. It's just a procedure. And if you can turn it into a procedure, you have unwanted thoughts, neti neti, or not this, or cancel, cancel. Then, whoa, so many wonderful things will happen, because you'll have more clarity around how your thoughts work as a production. You'll interrupt the magic show and be the magician, so to speak, who can make those unwanted thoughts disappear on demand. And this is freedom. So you can go into even more advanced levels. In Gary Weber's Happiness Beyond Thought and Evolving Beyond Thought, there are Sanskrit texts that I've memorized, and they are designed to cause you to have a deeper and different experience with unconscious thoughts in your mind. I mean, one of them is really funny. It says that the idea of a thought being real is as rare as a rabbit with horns. And I say that in Sanskrit, and it makes me laugh every time, because it's just like, wow, that's true. Thoughts aren't real. They're just coming in and out of awareness, and man, some of them are really annoying, but they're not real. And because I've done this Sanskrit day after day after day for years now, it just comes back on autopilot. There's nothing I have to do. It just happens. In the same way, I don't have to go to bicycle school every spring. I just hop on the bike and away we go. A little bit rusty sometimes, but it just happens that I'm able to do it. And that's what you can do when you train yourself with these techniques. So if you want to know how to do that and have a wonderful experience, then you could read The Victorious Mind or read one of those books that I've mentioned. There's many, many ways to get to Rome, and all the roads lead there, they say. But the answer is to say, hell yeah, I'm going to do it. And if you can't find your way to it, well then, you can use self-inquiry and just ask, who is the me that thinks that I can't do it? Where is that me that thinks that I can't do it? And then you think about the principles that we've talked about today about existing competence, and maybe it's the case that you're just not being realistic about the goals that you've set. And you think more about, well, what can I do? And how could I do it? What would be the next step? And then you use some of these tools like mind mapping, and you mind map out what would be the next step. And you have the vision statement out there for yourself, and you use the perfect present exercise, and you weave it all together to put things in your environment that influence you again and again and again and again, day after day after day. And then, if your goal is true, you truly will wake up one day and realize that you were the architect of your dreams. And if you want more help around this, I suggest you carry on and watch my video on how to visualize clearly next.